Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.
Welcome back to another edition of Monorail Monday. This is going to be the season finale for Season 3, Episode 18. We're going to talk a little bit about drive training in monorails. If you have not seen any Monorail Mondays before, put a link below. Check out some of our past stuff. Talk about a little bit of operations, working in monorails, working at Walt Disney World, some stories, funny stories, interesting stories, weird stories of working or interacting with guests. Lots of good stuff. So check that stuff out. This is going to continue on with training a little bit. Last week talked a little platform training and a little bit of the beginning of drive training. We're going to talk a little bit more about drive training today. So as you know, 6 days is our training schedule. At least, and most everything I'm telling you about is going to be applicable to when I started. A few things have changed over the years. I believe the training period is still the same for drive training. 6 days, 7th day is your checkout. And we talked a little bit last time about what's involved with a checkout. So what's involved with the training schedule? Well, say on the first day, I've got 6 days to get somebody up to speed. Day 1 is going to be maybe the first couple of hours we're going to review Holdpoints. There are 18 Holdpoints on the lagoon / the resort monorail, or the exterior, aka now they call it the express beam. There's 18 Holdpoints on each of those. There were 42 Holdpoints on the Epcot loop. You have to memorize those. You have to be able to spit out any Holdpoint. Most of the Epcot beam is pretty easy. Once you get out of the station, it's pretty much you're dealing with like 25, 35, 45, and those are pretty easy. The lagoon and exterior beams, sorry, I can't not think of them. I think of them how we called them way back. I can't call them Resort and Express because I spent so long calling them lagoon and exterior. I can't undo that in my head, so I will continue to call them that. But those beams have some different, you end up with some like 6 and 14, and you end up with some weird 66. They don't follow like every 5, every 10, that kind of thing necessarily. But you got to memorize these Holdpoints, and you have to know those right off the bat. If you don't have those memorized before we even get in a train, we're not getting in a train. You've got to know those Holdpoints off the top of your head. The emphasis was on visually driving, keeping an eye knowing what monorail are you following, where is it ahead of you, where are you clear to next. There is a block system on the train that you can use to see where you're clear to, or it'll tell you if you're approaching a dead section of beam, but that was always your secondary way of driving the train. Your primary was always visuals. It's changed a little bit. They've gotten away from that more recently. They don't push the visual quite as much as they used to, but everything was visual. So basically I drove like the computers don't work, nothing's there. I need to know exactly where's that next train, where can I go to? And the separation of the trains was basically a couple of Holdpoints. So let's say you're coming out of the transportation center, let's say your first Holdpoint is 10, and then there's one at 20 and one at 30. You are clear to a Holdpoint as long as there's another monorail 2 Holdpoints ahead. So once a train gets up the top of the hill of Contemporary, the train at the transportation center is cleared to leave. Once the train is holding, some of you may have seen trains holding out in front of the Magic Kingdom, between the Contemporary and the Magic Kingdom station. That's a fairly standard Holdpoint. Once they clear that, you're clear through the Contemporary. It basically, there's visuals for each Holdpoint. You can see where's the next train, where am I clear to, where does that train have to be passed. So that was an important part of memorization. There was a lot of other memorization stuff that you had to learn before, by the time you checked out. How many volts? 600 volts DC. You had to know all the abbreviations for everything, how to handle door alerts, brake shoes. You had to know all the different spiel settings and where those things are. There was a lot of stuff to memorize to get through, and that was intimidating to a lot of people. So first thing I do is make sure my person, the trainee that I'm working with, knows their hold points. If they know their hold points, that's a massive first step. So then we schedule a couple of drive times during the day, maybe twice in that first day, and that just get us into the monorail cab, learning how to drive, getting comfortable with just actually driving the train. The dead man, the actual control unit that you use to push the train forward or reverse, hit the brakes. There's basically a little handle, and you twist it. And you gotta twist it, you gotta hold it to move the train. If you let go of it, it's a dead man. As soon as you let go of it, the train comes to a stop. So you always have to be holding this control arm in position to move the monorail. So that's something you got to tell people. You got to, and a lot of trainees, they're moving it and they don't think, they let go of it a lot of times. So you end up, the train comes to a full stop. Now they got to re-engage it. In my day, when the Mark 6s were brand new, it was sort of a hybrid. There was a lot of screen stuff, but it was of course very 90s, late 80s and 90s era computer tech on those trains. You go all the way back to the Mark 4s, and it was all mechanical, and those were a lot of fun. Those were a lot of fun to drive because all the mechanicals looked a little bit like a cockpit, an airplane cockpit, with so many switches and circuit breakers and things in those trains. On the Mark IV, they had a little handle. You didn't twist it. It was just almost like one of those car gear shifter kind of thing. Had a little thumb handle on it. You had to hold that handle, that little thumb button, in for the train to move. If you let go of that button, the dead man engaged, train came to a complete stop. One of the things people used to do, not saying I did this, not throwing out any names, but it was known to happen occasionally, that the gooseneck mic that was in the Mark IV monorails, that it was just it was gooseneck, completely flexible. The life hack dead man on a Mark IV was basically to take that gooseneck microphone and you just put it into the button on the controller. So it's kind of like your own little autopilot. Nobody's driving like that all the time, but there are occasions, especially going to Epcot, where you're likely to go all the way around Epcot without even having to slow down too much to get to the Epcot loop. Yeah, that was a good time for autopilot. Just little things like that. Get a drive trainee acquainted with the cab of the monorail, where everything is. Get them getting a feel for how the train moves, how it responds, and stopping, learning to stop. You can always tell when there's a new driver and they go flying through the station and they got to back up, and every new person would do that. They would always come in a little fast, struggle to hit the exact spot. There usually were reflectors on the side of the cab. So there's usually a reflector there, and you can sort of just line up the door latch to this reflector, and you're like, you get that, you hit that, looking out your window, you can see that little reflector, you're perfect. Day 2, schedule a couple more drive times. We're getting a little more comfortable, starting to point out the visuals. Where are you clear to? Okay, there's red in the Magic Kingdom. Where are you clear to? Day 3, maybe I start introducing some issues. Okay, somebody's bumped up against the door in the back. What are you going to do? We got a door alert. So we start simulating some problems. And of course, usually when you're doing that, you're going to tell Central, hey, we're going to practice a door alert. We're going to practice, something, a particular stop, a particular issue, and that way they know it's not a real problem, it's just something you're practicing. They'll respond, make sure the trainee is responding appropriately. And that always got everybody really nervous when they're starting to have to respond to that. There's a lot of pressure they feel trying to get all this stuff right, memorize what they're doing, as well as paying attention to what's going on with the trains. Because even when something's going on with your train, you always need to be paying attention. Where are the other monorails in front of me? By day 4, I usually would start introducing guests in the cab. I typically like to hold the cab if we were doing a lot of intensive stuff, where we're going to be simulating issues on the train. I would hold the cab for that. But by that time, by day 4, you needed to start introducing guests in the cab and get people used to, these people are going to be in here and they're going to be asking you questions and they're going to be distracting you, sticking a camera in your face. So you got to be able to handle that as well as everything else. So I introduce guests in the cab. Usually people wouldn't say a whole lot or wouldn't interrupt too much if they could see we were training. But you needed to be prepared for that. Yeah, day 5, we're honing things up. Should start feeling pretty good about themselves. Probably make sure we've done some MAPO checks, which is checking the block light system on the trains, doing the checklist, making sure the checklist. By day 5, we should have at least taken 1 train out of shop as well as taken 1 train back and shutting down for the night. That's one of the things I told you previously. You could kind of make up your own schedule. Yes, but you did want to make sure that you scheduled at least 1 open shift and at least 1 closing shift. I tried to do 2 of each for most people, just to make sure you know how you can get the chance to bring a train out of shop, or you can start up a train from one of the monorail stations where the trains have been parked. You can do the checklist. You can get everything started up and see how morning checks run. You can do the same in reverse when things are closing, making sure that the train is clear. Anyway, by day 6 is basically let's just go over everything again. Let's do a couple of issues, little maintenance issues, to make sure that you feel comfortable responding to that. We make sure you're feeling pretty comfortable about your visuals and all of that sort of thing. Make sure you've covered all of the different beams, feel comfortable bumping, and let's see if I could do it. This is the signal for bumping the train. You're getting bumped. And when you bumped a driver out, you would talk about what train are you following? How many trains are on the beamway? Any issues going on with the monorail? Is your spiel caught up? Or is it behind, or is it even working? You know, some cases the spiel's not working. You got to have a driver who's got to manually give the spiel. So day 6, that's what you should be doing. And you should be real comfortable with the radio and pretty comfortable with handling most any situations. Maybe review some stuff to make sure that you feel comfortable with the test. And then that day 7 is that oral question test, and then the written test, and then the drive checkout with the different beams. It could happen on any beam, but most of the time it would be on the exterior or Epcot beam. They usually didn't do a lot of that on Lagoon beam because of the resorts, the extra stops, and just it takes longer to get around Lagoon beam. So you start introducing problems and different things that they might do on a training checkout, and it just slows things down even more. Another thing that we were always very focused on was cycle times. Cycle times were very important. That's how much time it takes for you to leave a station, circle around, come back, and leave again. And that includes loading and unloading. And so you wanted to get the maximum cycle time. That allowed you to increase the capacity of the monorail. If you take 20 minutes to do the Magic Kingdom loop on the exterior beam, that's too long. You're not getting nearly enough people through. It means trains are holding a lot. You need to come in, load the train, and get out. Now they have those little clocks. You will probably see they have clocks up at the end of the stations so that you can see how long the station time has been. But typically we didn't have anything like that was keeping track of the station time. You were just supposed to load the train as fast as you could, close it up, and get it dispatched. Faster you get those trains through the station, the faster they can cycle, the more capacity you can have. The trains would have, I believe it was 364 was the capacity. So the more times you got a train coming through, the more people you're going to be able to move through. One of the big things I always had in the guides was no stragglers. A lot of people are like, oh, hold the monorail. You're coming at the last second, holding for people coming up, and there's always somebody coming. There's always somebody like, oh, we're almost there, we can say hold that. There's always a straggler coming. And if you hold for each straggler, it drags out the station times. Now you got trains holding behind it. They can't come in here and drop people off. slows the whole system down. So what we're supposed to do is basically just load it, go. Now there are always reasons that that's not happening. Sometimes the morning and afternoon MAPO checks, those always slow things down a little bit. If a train is having a maintenance issue, let's say Monorail Red's cruising the transportation center on the lagoon beam, or the resort beam, and they're dealing with a maintenance issue, well, the trains behind it are going to know, I'll hang loose in the Contemporary a little longer. I won't necessarily be in such a rush to leave because I'm just going to end up holding out in the middle of the beamway. So they might hold a little bit. Or I'm in the Magic Kingdom, so I heard there's some maintenance going on with Monorail Red up ahead at Transportation Center. I'll hold in the station for a little bit longer until that's clear so that you don't sit out on the beamway. Now, let's say I'm in the Magic Kingdom. I'm waiting, I'm just like, oh, I'll just hang here a little bit longer because Monorail Red's getting that maintenance thing checked out. But then I see a Monorail Blue behind me. It's between the Magic Kingdom and the Grand Floridian. It's up at that high point. If I remember my Holdpoints correctly, maybe that's like 95, pylon 95 up there. So if somebody's sitting up there, well, now I need to go ahead and go. If there's clear Monorail beamway between me and the Contemporary, I need to go and let the other train come into the station. So you always had to be paying attention. What's in front of you, what's behind you, what's going on with through the radio, and figure out where the positioning of those trains are. It's something we try to work on during training, and just more driving, continuing to drive all the time. You just got the experience. And if you didn't, then you were not a very good monorail driver. As I stated, we drive visually. Visually was always the most important thing. And then you rely on the system as a backup. Now, the system will stop the train if you get too close. If you aren't paying any attention at all and you just driving willy-nilly, you are going to end up what they call a MAPO. And it's basically you've gone past your whole point, the train stops you automatically. When that happens, you either self-reported or another driver reported that you've overrun the whole point, which you can always see if you're a pylon or two past the whole point. Another driver can see you've overrun that, and it's also logged in the computer. You don't report it, they know exactly what time it happened. It was all logged in the computer. On the third overrun, the third time you had that happen, you would basically be transferred out of monorails. You couldn't drive anymore. So you had two that you could survive, and usually if you had an overrun, you would not be driving the rest of that day. You just become platform only. You had to fill a little witness statement. If you ever had a third overrun, you would be transferred out of the department. That would it wasn't something you could come back from. Always wanted to be hyper aware of that. Nobody wanted to have that. We were awarded safety days. I never had an overrun. Yay me, in 8 whatever years it was. I believe somewhere in the archives, I haven't seen it in a long time, but somewhere I've got it, and it's got a certificate award, like 1800 safety days or something like that. There's a little certificate for our safe days operation of the monorail with no overruns, no any other safety issues, just whatever it is, 1500, 1700 safe operating days or something with no issue whatsoever. So I was pretty proud of that. Interesting thing with the Holdpoints, when it was foggy at the Seven Seas Lagoon and right at the front of the Magic Kingdom, it gets real foggy some days. And some of those days you could be at the Holdpoint up high between the Grand Floridian and the Magic Kingdom, and you can't even see the Magic Kingdom station. So days like that, it's really tough for using your visuals to drive because you can't see everything. So it's always a little bit challenging in foggy conditions. You had to listen more to your radio, and you had to sort of be, you definitely would drive a little bit slower. You still use your speed, but you'd have to be a little more careful and just a little more cautious as far as your driving, just so you didn't want to have to come up on a whole point all of a sudden and find out you got to stop. So that's a little bit more of drive training, a little more what's involved in actually driving the monorail. Oh, there's so much more stuff to cover. I guess we'll have to do that in another season of Monorail Monday. So season 4 will be coming. Again, we're going to take a month or 2 month break, take a little break. We'll be bringing back Monorail Monday in the fall. We'll have another 6 episodes with more stuff to come. Probably talk a little bit more drive training and things like that. However, now this is not necessarily going to be the finale episode for season 3. It's the final regular episode. However, ask some questions. If you put any questions down here, comment below this video. You can @ me on Twitter. You can DM me on Twitter, @ me on Instagram. We will next week, we'll come out with a special bonus episode of Monorail Monday. It's going to be all question and answer stuff. I'm going to answer questions. It's going to be any questions you might have had along the way for more clarification on things we talked about this season. Thanks for joining us. Remember to like, subscribe, share, tell your friends. Comment below. Let us know what you think. Is there anything else you want to know? Are there questions you want to have asked in our special episode next week? Everybody, appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. And remember, have a good time all the time.